Hello, everybody, and welcome to the Cannabis Practice Group's first ever elephant style call. For those of you who don't know, an elephant style call originated with the International Practice Committee. And essentially what it is an interview style call with a few members of the membership. The purpose is really to get to know them on a more intimate level. And in this case, to understand a little bit more about their cannabis practice and cannabis in their jurisdiction. So before we get to that, and before I hand this over to Eric, who has been planning the call for months at this point, let me quickly have you all on the call introduce yourself, name, firm name, location, and how about just whether or not your firm practices cannabis law. I'm going to go based on the individuals on my screen. So Robert, we're going to start with you.
Hi, Bob Wayne. I'm with Rothman Gordon in Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania. We do a certain amount of cannabis work. Can't speak today. We'd like to do more. We do represent some clients who have interest in companies with medical marijuana licenses and permits in Pennsylvania. Recreational cannabis is still illegal here.
All right, welcome. Mike? You're muted.
Mike Weinstein from Ferris and Britton in San Diego, business law firm. I'm in charge of the litigation side of the firm, and I actually don't have a cannabis practice, but I've been involved for 3 or 4 years in litigation involving the sale of property for which obtaining a conditional use permit for a cannabis dispensary was a primary issue, and all sorts of horrible litigation that has spun off from that. So glad to be here.
Welcome, Basco.
Hey, morning or afternoon, depending on where you are. Vasco Alexander, Orange County, California. So Mike, I'm about an hour away from you. I do commercial litigation, no cannabis litigation or otherwise, but I thought, hey, you know what? I'll jump on this and see what folks are doing with it. So very nice to meet everyone.
Welcome, nice to see you again. Jim.
Hi, I'm Jim Neild. I'm in Ridgeland, Mississippi, and we are a brand new cannabis state. We just had a medical marijuana program that became effective June 1. And so we're all trying to figure out what the heck to do. But yes, I do have a couple of cannabis clients that I've helped do some private placements. I'm a corporate, transactional, and securities guy, and look forward to learning about everybody else. Thanks.
Wonderful. Nice to see your face. Julie.
Hey, everybody. Julie Fournier, Houston, Texas. We are not a cannabis firm, but we have a lot of clients who have interests in getting into the business. And so I'm just looking to see who we've got in Primerus that I can connect them with. Texas is behind the curve on our laws here. And so far our clients have been investing in California, Colorado, other places. But as we move towards opening up in Texas, we're going to need to get on top of it. So I look forward to learning from everybody. I'm only here for about 30 minutes today, so I apologize in advance for leaving early.
Well, welcome. Glad you're here for now. Michelle.
Hi all, Michelle Mabugat here, Greenberg, Gloucester, Los Angeles, along with Eric and Alexandra. I'm a member of Primerus Cannabis Group's executive committee. I'm a corporate M&A attorney, practice almost exclusively in this space for 11 years now, and most of my clients are based out of California, but I have multi-state operator clients as well. And so thankful to have you all here today.
Thanks, Michelle. Kelsey?
Hello, everyone. I'm Kelsey Affronte. I'm an attorney with JP here at Beresford Booth in Edmond, Washington. We do not do a whole lot of cannabis work, but I'm a civil litigation attorney and just had a case come in the door that I think will require some of that knowledge. So I thought I would join all of you today.
Welcome. JP, you're actually next on my list. Anything to add?
That worked out well. I'm primarily in litigation, but I've had one cannabis client who I've been with since cannabis became legal here in Washington. And so I've done quite a bit of cannabis related work, but just for the one client, and the rest of my practice is litigation. But I'd love to learn from other people and what y'all are doing in various places where it's becoming legal. So
Certainly. The benefit of these calls, correct?
absolutely.
Ken, you're up next.
Hi, Ken Rashbaum, Barton LLP's New York office. I head the Privacy and Cybersecurity and Technology Transactions Group at Barton, and my involvement with cannabis at this point, in addition to working with Eric and Julie Carroll to get the practice going, is working on what we call the ancillary services. What the businesses need for things like cybersecurity, data management, insurance, business formation, basically working at that aspect. New York, as you've heard, doesn't have its licensing applications and regulations ready yet, but we're working with cannabis organizations to prepare them for when that happens.
Wonderful. Thanks for joining, Ken. Alexandra?
Hi, everyone. I apologize for not having a camera on. Someone seems to have walked off with it, but I am Alexandra Becker. I'm with Noller and Heller Kaufman in Albany, New York. And along with Eric, Michelle, and Carrie, we are the Cannabis Primerus Executive Committee. My primary area of practice is corporate and M&A with a specialty in liquor licensing. And New York is in the process as we speak of drafting regs and statutes and all those good things for cannabis. So it's very much going to be an emerging practice area over the next few years. So very excited to have all of you here with us today to learn more about what you guys do.
Awesome. Thanks. JK, I don't know if you can unmute while driving.
I'll do my best. My apologies also for not having my camera on.
It's just fine.
JK Elkin. I am also with Barton, and I have a fractional general counsel practice. I do have some cannabis clients, and I anticipate I will be gaining some more. So just here to help out and learn as well. Thank you.
Wonderful. Thanks for joining. David.
Hello, everybody. My name is Dave Hendrickson. I'm from Charleston, West Virginia. We have medical marijuana has been licensed in West Virginia. They've toyed with adopting a legalization of marijuana use, but they haven't done it so far. And so I thought, while the time is right, I should hop on this and figure out what's going on, and hopefully can attract some new business. Good to meet y'all.
Wonderful. Nice to see your face.
Good to see you.
And last but not least, Jorge. Who is on mute still? There we go.
Hi, nice to meet you. My name is Jorge. I'm an environmental lawyer from Bogotá, Colombia, and I'm really interested in getting knowledge of cannabis around the world. So thank you, and I'm really excited about this.
Wonderful. And without further ado, I'm going to hand it over to Eric Sleeper. Eric, please introduce yourself and go ahead and get started with your portion of the call. But you're muted. You're welcome.
Halfway there. All right, thanks, Katie. And I'm hoping desperately that I'll be able to stay on this through the whole thing. I'm in Boston and without a power cord and about halfway through my laptop. So we'll see how far we get. I may end up jumping on the phone. But again, I appreciate, I'm Eric Sleeper with Barton LLP. As Ken mentioned, we have a cannabis law practice at the firm. We just started working with somebody on a startup situation with respect to their LLC arrangement, et cetera. And we've been doing some representations prior to that with respect to the infusion market, amongst other things. And from that, that's one of the offshoots that I think led to this cannabis practice group, as Michelle and Alexandra had mentioned. They were good enough to join me in forming the executive committee and getting this off the ground. And one thing we probably won't be spending much time on today is the US market, although On the site, the website, under the Cannabis Practice Group, there is the PowerPoint presentation that we did on our first presentation back on February 22nd, and it lays things out pretty nicely there too. So for anybody who's interested in expanding things a little bit knowledge-wise, by all means, feel free to take a look at the PowerPoint. Today's focus is on the international market, more specifically in the Latin American market, but the reason for that is that it very much is sort of a microcosm of the international market around the world in general at the moment. And so we do have roundtable participants in the form of Felipe Chapula from Mexico, Veronique Evans from Bahamas, Ángela Pinzón from Colombia, and Melissa Garcia may be joining us from Ecuador. And I will let them each introduce themselves a little bit more as we get to speaking with each one of them individually. But just to give you sort of a background on the international market, back in December of 2020, there is a organization called the Commission on Narcotic Drugs. It's the UN's central drug policy making body. And after receiving a number of recommendations from the World Health Organization, they voted, the members did, to remove cannabis from what they had labeled as the Schedule I drug under the 1961 Single Convention on Narcotic Drugs. It wasn't an overwhelming vote, but it was a majority vote, and as a result, it was removed. That opened the door to the potential legalization for medicinal, at least for medicinal and therapeutic purposes, and sort of in general has opened the door internationally to exploring these markets more significantly. That, however, has led to some fairly significant diversity internationally from a legalization standpoint. It runs anywhere from, although there are some 39 countries now that have legalized or regulated some form of medical and or commercial recreational cannabis, it still runs the gamut from a situation like Canada, where there's been almost complete legalization, to almost none in many Asian and Middle Eastern countries. The rest are sort of a mix, much like a lot of the rest of the world when it comes to decriminalization and legalization. It's a real mix. Everything from, again, decriminalization to liberalizing law enforcement, low-grade violations, to the treatment of medical cannabis, as well as the commercial recreational cannabis market. And some are on the cusp of now going big time, like Germany, assuming that they actually do approve recreational use. It will end up becoming a huge market in that part of Europe, so much so that they've already determined that Germany alone will not be able to produce the level of cannabis necessary to satisfy that market, and that they very much will likely have to rely on other countries, which is interesting because, as you'll hear when we talk to Ángela from the Colombia standpoint, where they have been focusing on foreign trade for reasons just like that. But again, Latin America is sort of a microcosm of this. At the same time, the market is expected to be roughly a $45 billion a year market by 2026. Also, to give you an idea, in the US right now, legalized recreational sales of marijuana have now eclipsed on an annual basis that of Starbucks. Starbucks, of course, is in every state in the country, and virtually, as we all say, on every street corner in every major city. Legalized cannabis on a recreational basis only exists now in 19 states, with the recent addition of Rhode Island, and yet their annualized sales last year were approximately 24 billion, where Starbucks was 20 billion. So that gives you an idea of just how quickly this market is growing. But let's talk about Latin America, and this is where I'd like to bring in our other participants, starting with Felipe. And Felipe, can you give us a quick introduction to yourself and the firm?
Absolutely, Eric. Good afternoon to everyone. Good morning still to those in California. My name's Felipe Chapula. I am a partner at CCN, CCN is a Mexico law firm who also has offices in the United States. So we are a Texas office with offices in Mexico as well. And we've been members of Primerus for roughly that of maybe 8 or 9 years now. And our firm is a full service firm, and we are involving ourselves in the cannabis practice. Although it's not a practice per se yet in Mexico, there has been legislation passed to at least set the foundation for future expansion in that area. I'll stop right there. I sit in Mexico City, and I am the managing partner of our firm in Mexico.
I appreciate that last point, Felipe, because as we both know, things have been interesting in Mexico when it comes to the courts, particularly the Supreme Court, and legislatively, where things have panned out. Now, as I understand it, going back as far as 2009 or thereabouts, there was at least a movement towards decriminalizing at least small amounts on a possessory basis, something like 5 grams or less. Then it was a number of years later that we first heard from or I guess it was roughly about 2017 or so, as I understand it, that there was limited medical use legalization that, again, as I understand it, was less than 1% THC, unlike the more typical, at least in the US, of less than 3%. And then there was the string of Supreme Court decisions that determined that the laws prohibiting recreational use were unconstitutional. And then the legislative branch finally taking it up about a year ago, I guess typical to what would happen in the US at the federal level. The lower house passes it and the upper house puts the brakes on it. And so there still seems to be something of an unaligned, the courts and the legislature still seem to be unaligned more or less. But can you fill us in a little bit on that?
Sure. Pretty much the summary that you've provided, Eric, is accurate. This is something that has been in the works for at least a decade, right? Starting from the depenalization or criminalization of personal use marijuana, going up to where we are right now, which is a Supreme Court dictating that the use, both for recreation as well as medicinal, is legal, and it is constitutional because it is intimately tied to the individual's constitutional right to the development of his or her person or personality, right? So it's within what we call the individual guarantees of any individual in Mexico. So at the constitutional level, it's been fixed, or at least, like I said, the foundations have been laid. Where we're having trouble right now is at the legislation. And I'm anticipating that we will continue to have problems at the administrative level also, because even now, where the medicinal use of medical marijuana has already been incorporated into the general health law. So at the secondary law level, the use of medical cannabis is already incorporated into at least one of the various laws that are going to regulate this. At the administrative level, there are no issuances of permits to import, permits to manufacture, permits to sell. So, and there's a variety of different executive offices that would handle that, mainly the Department of Health, the Department of Customs, what we call kind of like our FDA, which is called COFEPRIS. Those are going to be the governing levels right now, right? They're also talking about maybe the creation of a special commission handling the entire cannabis topic and the creation of a special cannabis law. Like you said, we've already gone up and down the ladder once, and Congress has failed. Initially, the bill was introduced into the lower house. Several discussions came about. Eventually, a draft of an approved bill went up to the Senate. The Senate kicked it back down. Right now, we are expecting, and because that was tabled, the Senate now in Mexico, and we don't have state senates, it's all federal when we're talking about legislation and law passing and all that. with regards to senates, and the matter of cannabis is going to be a federal matter. The Senate has now decided to introduce a bill for discussion as to how cannabis, both medical as well as recreational, is going to be imported, produced, sold, how foreign investment is going to participate, what kind of manufacturing will be allowed, percentages, et cetera. And the leader of the Senate is actually championing that bill. And he carries a lot of clout. He does belong to the governing party, to Morena. And that senator is who at least has advised that he will be championing in this upcoming legislative term, which starts in September. He will be trying to champion that bill through the Senate. And hopefully before that period is over in December, the ordinary period, hopefully we'll be seeing something being pushed down to the lower house. The governing part, we had midterms in 2021. The governing party, which is Morena, if I'm not mistaken, does not hold majority in the lower house without the aid of its alliances. We do not have a bipartisan system in Mexico. There are roughly 6 relevant parties in Congress, both Senate and the House. So there's a lot of lobbying that has to happen, right? So that's pretty much where we are right now. All the law firms that are starting to focus on this, businesses, major enterprises, large global players such as Canopy from Canada and all those big guys, they've already put an eye on this, right? And they're lobbying, they're retaining lobbying firms, legislative and congressional lobbying firm, to make this pass as streamlined and as liberal or flexible as possible without as much regulation as possible, right? We're still going through a process in government where our government is still, well, is more regulatory than past governments, right? So let's see what happens there. But it is something that is being moved. It is a new thing. It is taking time. But like I said, we do feel that the foundations are set to make that happen.
And what about hemp? I mean, how does hemp play into things in the Mexican market?
Yeah, it's all being wrapped up into the same. They're not breaking it up. But hemp is called cáñamo in Spanish, and cáñamo is having its own treatment as well as CBD. THC and recreational is the most complicated of all the discussions, right? But they don't want to be approving it piecemeal. At least that's what we're hearing. They do not want to go piecemeal because they fear that if they don't push it through the system as a bundle, something's going to be left behind. There's going to be changes in Congress. There's going to be changes in majorities, and something may be left behind. So my understanding and what I'm hearing from the major lobbying firms, et cetera, is that they want to push it all through completely. And right now, hemp is kind of at the same situation as CBD, right? Medical CBD. Sorry about that.
So let me jump to, from a business standpoint, if you had a magic 8 ball, what is sort of your feeling prediction wise that where the country may be going over the next year, 2 years with regards to both the Mexican cannabis market, as well as also from, those businesses outside Mexico looking to do business in Mexico, and or investors looking to invest, on the cannabis side. Any thoughts, with respect to that?
Yeah, I honestly think that we will be seeing progress next year. I do not see this happening this year. I think next year we'll see more. These are sensitive topics. Remember, we have presidential election and which also includes the first wave of Congress in 2024, in the summer of 2024. And there is significant pressure both on the incumbent party as well as the opposition to have this legislation passed. So I do honestly think that by sometime next year, maybe around this time, maybe summer of next year, we will probably be seeing those amendments in the health law, the creation of the cannabis regulation law, which that is a special law that is being attempted to be pushed, as well as all the different amendments to the customs law, to the our equivalent FDA laws, and all those different regulations. Right now, what you're able to see, the little bits and pieces that you're seeing where you can buy some degree of CBD in Mexico, or obviously the possibility to grow cannabis plants in Mexico. They're normally working under what's called an amparo, which is similar to a habeas corpus or an injunction in other jurisdictions, where based on the Supreme Court's decriminalization of all these activities, as well as the partial amendments that we've already made in several laws, individuals and certain importers, but you're talking about smaller importers in Mexico, have filed these amparos to get the protection of the federal courts and allow them to either import or distribute or consume mainly CBD products, right? But it's not, and I do not recommend that channel for solid institutional investors, or both domestic or foreign investors that are going to pour in whatever amount of investments and do some degree of commitment with their business in a foreign country, or to be domestic and do it here in Mexico. I would not recommend doing it through those processes. But if we look back historically, that's how many of for instance, the casinos started in Mexico. Gambling was forbidden in Mexico not too long ago, talking about maybe 10 or 12 years ago, maybe a little bit more. And some of them started with amparos, right? But it's not the way to recommend doing just institutional business, unfortunately. But if you hear or see a little bit of this and that happening in the country, it's because some of them have that federal circuit court protection under the argument of it's a constitutional law, right.
Felipe, I have a quick question, if you don't mind. Pascal Alexander. If you're a foreign investor, do you have to partner up with a local citizen or a locally domiciled company in order to invest, or can you go in directly?
Well, not specific to cannabis, the answer is you don't need a local partner. Mexico and its foreign investment laws has been open to 100% foreign investment for over 25 years. So foreign investment in Mexico is cracked wide open. It's been cracked wide open for over a quarter century. Mexico is the country with more free trade agreements in the world. We have free trade agreements with over 38 or 42 countries in the world. So because of that, our foreign investment laws, based on the level that Mexican law provides to international agreements, which is at the constitutional level, our laws are our secondary laws are obliged to leave that wide open, right? There are certain reservations that throughout history have been made, a little bit here with energy, something with oil, which was recently amended some years ago in the past administration, and there's been kind of like a counter reform there. But we don't know yet if there's going to be some limitation specifically to cannabis, at least not yet. In the bundled amendment of laws that are going to happen, I would not be surprised if that initiative is going to be reforming, obviously, the health law, the customs law, potentially even the income tax law, the value added tax law. Who knows? Maybe they'll put a different VAT tax on cannabis, right? It'll certainly impact what's called the special products tax law. And maybe they'll open a little window in the foreign investment law, which I doubt. It would probably go against various of the covenants that we have with USMCA and other treaties. But sometimes our congressmen and senators are not that savvy with regards to violating international treaties, right? So, and then we leave it to the courts to kind of fix that, right? And get it counter amended. But when that amendment comes, it's going to be a bundled amendment to multiple laws, which will include the creation of a new law. And hopefully they will not be touching the foreign investment restrictions, because technically all those caveats and reservations that could be made have already been made. So that would require an amendment to NAFTA or USMCA or the EU treaty or other treaties with whom Mexico has trade relationships, right? So we are with a good degree of certainty expecting that it will be allowed at 100% level that foreign investment participate without any kind of special permits or regulations. That's our expectation.
Well, I appreciate that.
All right, well, let's give one of Felipe.
Glad to clarify.
Felipe, I very much appreciate the background and the insights. Let's give one of our other participants a chance to talk about
absolutely
how things are a little different over in their parts, although geographically it's not that far away. So in that regard, I'd ask Veronique Evans to log in, and let me ask Veronique a few questions with respect to the Bahamas and what's going on there. Veronique, it's my understanding that cannabis is still treated as an illegal drug in the Bahamas, that it's not really decriminalized as it is in other parts of the country, of the world, and that enforcement has been relatively strict and not shown a real chance towards changing, and that's largely because of the very early Drug Act from the late 1920s and the expansion of that back in the 60s. But at the same time, as I also understand it, it's fairly easily accessible to still procure cannabis in the Bahamas. So I'd like to get an idea of, there sort of in general, what at least the views are, sort of the public wise, as opposed to necessarily the government, when it comes to both decriminalization as well as legalization in the Bahamas.
Okay. Good afternoon, everybody. Like you said, I'm Veronique Evans and Company in Nassau, Bahamas, which normally would be beautiful, but today the weather is appalling. So I would just like to give a little caveat. I may get kicked off because my electricity may go off. The weather is really bad. So I may have to switch over to my phone, but God willing, I could get through my presentation before that happens. But to answer your question, Eric, well, there's a couple of parts to it. The first thing is the decriminalization, where while there's not been a legal move to decriminalize cannabis, what we've had is sort of a practical decriminalization, whereby the courts have, in terms of sentencing, been relatively lenient in terms of possession simpliciter, which is what we call just possession for your own use, as opposed to possession with intent to supply. So what courts have done is that they've been sort of giving fines, community service, conditional discharges, those types of things. So that's been going for quite some time. And what has been happening is that there's been a commission created which is basically expunging records for persons. So say, for example, you had a cannabis conviction or some other minor conviction 10 years ago, and it's still popping up, causing you to not be able to get a visa and all of these different things, and it's hamstringing you. You can actually petition that organization to have your record expunged. And so a lot of persons with cannabis convictions have been having their records expunged. So there's been a practical decriminalization without, I mean, there's no statutory basis for it, but any statute under our law, any statutory penalty is a maximum. So a judge can sentence, a judge or a magistrate can sentence you to anything from an unconditional discharge straight up to the maximum the maximum penalty in the statute. And so they've been sort of interpreting it in a very purposive way to affect that. But in terms of legalization or anything like that, we're waiting on legislation. We've been promised legislation. The Attorney General promised that there would be a draft statute circulated before the end of the first quarter of this year. That never happened. So we're waiting to see where that's going to go, but there is a move. There's bipartisan support for legalization, at least for medicinal purposes. Recreational purposes is, of course, a different kettle of fish, but there's bipartisan support for legalization for medical purposes. And so we're just really waiting to see how that's going to look in a draft statute. What I expect will happen is that we'll go along the same lines as Jamaica did, where they basically amended their Dangerous Drugs Act to provide for personal use and medicinal use in that. So they didn't do a separate statute. What I think we're proposing to do is to have a separate statute, which will then work in conjunction with an amendment to the DDA, so that it would sort of work on both sides, because it wouldn't make sense to have one statute that would be contradicting the other one. So they'd have to do a sort of a little package of legislation, amendments and new legislation to come in. And I was really hoping that we would have had that, at least a draft, so I could talk a little bit about it. But like everything else, they say it's coming, you don't know when. We don't have elections anytime soon, so we may never see this again until 2025, because we're not due for elections until 2026. But I'm hopeful that it will sort of, we'll be able to have that in mind, so we can know where we're going with this, because we really, it's just all sort of up in the air. Their thoughts, expressions of we're going to open it up for Bahamians, it's going to be a source of wealth for Bahamian people. We don't know how that's going to look. So we're just really waiting to see.
Okay. Yeah, fair enough. So the medical cannabis bill at this point is, it's closer to a reality, but it's still yet fully on paper and available for consideration in one way or the other. Is that correct?
I think, yeah, they did circulate a draft bill, which was actually leaked. That was a working draft that wasn't supposed to come out to the public. And I think it's going to be copiously amended, because there was a lot of pushback from different stakeholders. People found the licensing fees to be prohibitive. They're saying $10,000 per license, and to do anything significant, you need about 3. So, there's that sort of, there were some very strong comments that were made that I think will be taken into consideration in the draft that we will be getting. But the medical bill that was leaked kind of gave an idea of where the government's head is. And that's where we saw that it was going to be roughly along the lines of Jamaica. Now, how closely they stick to that going forward, I don't know, because there were, for example, the Rastafarians said that they felt that they shouldn't have to have licenses because they use cannabis for religious purposes, and they didn't feel like they were adequately protected. And so there are all of these different sort of comments that were made on the draft that I think will be incorporated into the amended draft, as it were. So yeah, I think they may stick to the core of it, but I don't think it's going to look as much. It's not going to look as much like as the previous bill. I think they're going to change a good bit. That's what I expect anyway, taking into account and also that we can see how it's working over years in Jamaica now, so they can see what they need to tweak. Because I think they just pretty much took something and said, okay, we'll just do something very, very similar, and then now it's going to be adopted. So I think it'll look a little bit different than what the draft legislation that was circulated in last year looked like.
So the future then in the Bahamas, at least from a legalization standpoint, is really on the medicinal side then, as opposed to anything, at least at this point. Is there any real discussion at all recreationally?
There is a discussion. There's lobbying for it. We have a difficulty in terms that the religious community is against it. They only very grudgingly allowed the medicinal use. And I think that was probably because cancer is a very, very big problem in the Bahamas. And everyone's aware that, the medicinal use for cancer patients has shown really good promise. And so I think there's a grudging acceptance of medicinal, but I think recreational is coming. It's going to come. I think it'll definitely happen. But when it's going to happen, I don't think it's going to be as quick as it doesn't have the support that medicinal use has. So in terms of a timeline, I don't see that coming. I say maybe in about 5-10 years, once people see how much money can be made, that might grease the wheels a little bit. But I don't see that happening right up to now. But I could see the medicinal one coming through if the government pushes it, which they're saying they will. The government, I could see that happening probably not anymore this year, but definitely by next year. I think that would be up and running. But the recreational is going to be a little while in coming. I think people have to be sold on it. And after a couple millions are made, I think a lot of people will be more inclined to get with it.
Good. All right. Well, obviously, it certainly is a distinction from what's going on, at least in the Mexican market. And I think we'll find, with respect to our participant in representing Colombia here, Ángela Pinzón, that we're going to see an even greater distinction, with what's going on in that country. So why don't I let Ángela come in and have a chance to introduce yourself and her firm, and we can get a better perspective from the Colombian market. Ángela?
Hi, of course. I think there's someone with their mic open.
I think I figured it out.
Okay. Okay, thank you. Yes, Eric. Well, for everyone, my name is Ángela Pinzón. I'm an associate from the recognized Colombian law firm Pinilla, González y Prieto Abogados, which is a firm based in Bogotá. And I have more than 10 years of experience, and I have concentrated my practice on environmental and natural resources issues. But during the recent years, I have also practiced on cannabis law and been advising different national and international companies of the cannabis industry. And our firm is currently a member of Asocolcana, which is one of the biggest associations of cannabis in Colombia. What I could say at first is that Colombia has two different and separate regulations. The first is for everything that has to do with personal consumption. There are specific limits for personal consumption depending on the drug. For instance, marijuana has a limit for no more than 20 grams, while cocaine is just 1 gram, has a 1 gram limit for personal consumption. And what has happened during the last year is that there have been different Supreme Court rulings stating that if, for instance, any individual that has personal consumption that exceeds these amounts stated by law, they have to prove for criminal purposes that such limits or such quantities exceeding the limits were basically for personal consumption and not for commercial purposes. If it's for commercial purposes and it's proven that it was for that, then of course it will be subject to prosecutions. Passing on on the other side, as I was saying, that there are two different sections or types of regulations in Colombia. Colombia also has a specific regulatory framework for the medicinal, scientific, and recently in 2022 for industrial purposes. This is a very robust regulatory framework. And Colombia has been working in medicinal and scientific regulation since 2015. And recently in 2021 and 2022, where Colombia was working for and striving for the exportation of dried cannabis flower, which is now a reality. So this is very important because this will bring a lot of expectations for investments, foreign investment in Colombia. And it's a big market. And as you know, Colombia has a really quite good advantages to be one of the biggest cannabis exporters in the world. As you know, we have climate conditions and landscape conditions that allow us and will allow us to be one of the principal exporters in the world. For instance, as you may know, we have like about 12 hours of light a day throughout the year, which this is really good for the cultivation of the cannabis plant. We have the capacity to produce between 4 to 5 harvests and guarantee supply to different countries that have that demand. Also, we have lower cultivation costs compared to the largest flower exporters like Canada, Holland, Portugal. And we have highly qualified talent in agribusiness, as Colombia has a wide experience in agricultural in general. And of course, we have abundant water resources, which is something that obviously is an advantage for the production of cannabis plants. So Colombia in this point is having as a pioneer in Latin America in its regulations, because it's opening and decriminalizing different activities such as for medical purposes, scientific purposes, and also industrial purposes, and of course the exportation of cannabis dry flower. And we have different licenses, 7 licenses in total for the cultivation of the plant, psychoactive and non-psychoactive plant of cannabis, also for the production of the derivatives. And I mean, we have a lot of authorizations. So we are now in the case of implementing such regulations. And till now, we have had like about 565 licenses in Colombia for medical and scientific purposes for different types of activities. And so Colombia is a very interesting market for investors because of all the advantages that I just told you. Also, we envisage that this new regulation will bring also to Colombia new opportunities for economic growth, for Colombia's economic growth, and also to recover from the pandemic crisis, economic crisis, because a lot of agricultural activities were stopped during the pandemic. So this will boost the economy and a lot of mitigation of unemployment. We foresee a good opportunity with this new regulation.
So with respect to, I mean, obviously there's potentially, unlike the discussion so far, there seems to be some great opportunities potentially in Colombia. Interestingly enough, in a country that was marked for traffic.
Oh no, Angela, you're muted.
I think we lost Eric.
I think you're right. You're right. I'm not really sure where he was going, but I know he had identified the questions ahead of time for you, Angela, if you want to let everyone know what the question was.
Okay, no, I think that maybe he was trying to talk about Colombia's background on criminalization and trafficking and drug dealing, because everyone may be thinking like, well, this is really great that Colombia is decriminalizing activities for scientific and medical purposes, but what about everything that Colombia has in their background in drug dealing and this type of thing? So what I would like to say is, yes, of course, Colombia has this risk. I mean, we have been combating with drug dealing over many years since the 60s. In the 60s and 70s, Colombia had a really a big boom with the consumption and the sale and export of cannabis around the world. This cannabis export tended to decline in the 80s, and mostly in the 80s it was more about cocaine trade. But Colombia has signed a lot of different international convention treaties and bilateral agreements with different countries such as the US, and has been constantly combating drug control convention, has, we have also we have a drug statute applicable since 1986. We have a lot of regulations concerning the control and eradication of drugs in Colombia. It has not been totally possible, but we're going through that path, and we hope that this is something that we can envisage through the foregoing years. But Colombia has also a very difficult situation, and it has different rural areas that are difficult to access because of the guerrilla presence that that we have on our armed conflict, internal armed conflict. So this is difficult, the state presence. But with this new regulation, what is happening is that this will be an opportunity for not only for investors but for the country to start closing those windows of illegality, because of course these new regulations have a lot of conditions and requirements for the applicants that want to obtain a license to do the activities that are decriminalized. They have to comply with a lot of regulations. I mean, they have to have no criminal pasts. They have to assign anti-corruption commitments. The government the Ministry of Justice will be doing different and periodic controls over the year. The people that are doing the medical activities or the planting for medical purposes or for industrial purposes or for scientific purposes have to report their sales or productions every month. So this is something that will be and is being really controlled by the government. You have to have security protocols to ensure that this will not be used for illegal activities. So I think that Colombia is in a good scenario in this moment. And of course, there are specific territories that are being authorized for these purposes, and the territories that are more in the illegality are in an area where there is no state presence, but the ones that are authorized can be here in Bogotá, at the rural part of Bogotá. So it's something that is very controlled by the police, by criminal authorities. So I mean, it's difficult to process for many, but it's a reality, and we have all the regulations and all the measures to ensure that this will not go for illegality. And of course, if you're a licensee and you're doing something that is wrong, that's illegal, then you will be, of course, criminalized and prosecuted, and you will not be able to continue your activities. Your license will be, shut down.
Sure. Eric, were you able to call in? Is that the number that called in?
I think I'm on. Can you hear me?
We can.
Yes.
Well, so much for technology. I appreciate the fact that I'm able to at least get through via the phone. And Angela, obviously I appreciate the points that you've made. The interesting thing I found about the market in Colombia is just what I said. After having such a history of being persecuted on the trafficking and smuggling side, one of the biggest opportunities appears to be the foreign trade market, the way things are it appears anyway that things are being set up in Colombia. And this comes to mind with the comment I made at the beginning, where you have a country like Germany, which by all appearances has already admitted that it wouldn't be able to supply the potential demand, assuming that they actually legalize it recreationally, that they're undoubtedly going to have to be looking to foreign trade partners. South Africa and other parts of Africa have generally been pointed to, but I have to believe that Colombia is certainly in the forefront there too, as potentially having a significant ability to actually, supply other parts of the world that are looking to, deal with the fact that the demand is so beyond their own production means.
Yes, of course. According to Analtex, which is a Colombian Association for International Commerce, the national cannabis industry will produce for 2030 more than about 40,000 jobs in the country. And the intermediate price scenario will have reached exports of US dollars of $1,733 million. So this is going to be a really, really important market. We hope that the potential markets of Colombia are Germany, the UK, Brazil, and Peru. because these markets do not have the productive capacity to meet its internal demand. So Colombia, having this landscape advantage and the climate and the possibilities of its geographical situation, we are able to produce during the whole year, which is something that most countries don't have, and this puts us in a good scenario against other competitors.
Sure. No, again, that's what I thought was unique about the situation currently in Colombia in comparison to other Latin American countries. And again, sort of fits into what I'm finding to be the interesting dichotomy of what's going on in the various Latin American countries, because I do think it's indicative of countries throughout the world in general that are attempting to get their arms wrapped around the whole legalization movement, whether, again, it's in Latin America or other parts of Europe, et cetera. Canada is unique unto itself with respect to how far it's gone legalization-wise. But at the same time, I thought that the Latin American market does give us a pretty good idea of sort of the gamut of the way things are being treated now internationally. As I mentioned earlier, the expectation of the revenue base for this is significant. Again, they're talking roughly over $40 billion by 2026 in the international markets. At the same time, because of the high level of taxes being generated, whether it's at a state or federal level here in the U.S. or other countries, the cat's sort of out of the bag in that respect, because the tax revenues are significant, and it's obviously difficult to put that back in the bag once it's out. And both at a state and federal level, they see the benefits to, at least from a revenue standpoint, tax revenue standpoint. Now, I don't know if Karina Santillán was going to join us out of Ecuador, and she had to back out, but there was a potential for one of her colleagues to join us. I know we're running up against time here, so I don't want to prolong things. I don't know if Melissa Garcia had been able to join us. If not, we could certainly address that country at another time, but I did want to leave at least a little bit of time to the extent that anybody had any questions that they wanted to ask of the participants or any of us before the call came to a conclusion.
This is Mike Weinstein. I was just curious about, I mean, we had talk about what the situations are in these various countries in South America, and then also in the US, but what about the potential, I mean, manufacturing outside the US and then getting that cannabis to the US market? I'm assuming that there's a big hurdle in that regard. Because of the federal laws in the US, but I'm a novice on that. So I'm curious, Eric, if you have any comment on that.
Yeah, I'm happy to, and obviously if any other participant or committee member wants to add something to what I have to say, by all means do. You're correct. I mean, the federal law being what it isn't, and I emphasize isn't in the US, that becomes a huge issue, just like it is when you're dealing with interstate commerce in general in the US. You want to produce in New York but sell in California, good luck. You could probably get away with it potentially if you remained under the radar screen, which is, of course, difficult to do when you're also having to pay your federal taxes, because the other interesting dichotomy is there that, yes, it's illegal federally, but God forbid you don't pay your taxes. So in that respect, trying to bring in the product from outside the country, yes, you're going to run into the same situation and concerns, and probably even greater concerns beyond just the interstate commerce concerns, which does, make things a bit unique too, because as we all know, the country has significant foreign trade relations with any number of countries, including the Latin American countries represented here in Mexico. So you would think that it would be an easy stretch to apply those same trade regulations and trade laws and open trade policies to the cannabis market. But again, you're going to run into the Schedule 1 illegal drug argument that's going to keep that from happening. So without the feds making an alteration to the Schedule 1 designation for cannabis, I think that's a huge hurdle. But again, if somebody else knows something beyond what I do, I'm happy to hear from others too.
Yeah, Erica, this is Michelle Mabigat, by the way. I echo your sentiments. The only thing I would add is in the US, hemp and cannabis are pretty much treated completely separately. So while it is legal, subject to heavy regulations and restrictions to import hemp from foreign countries, it is not legal to import cannabis, and I don't foresee that changing anytime in the near future. I think we'll see interstate commerce become legalized before the importation from foreign countries.
Of course, the irony of that, Michelle, too, is that like we're talking about a country like a situation in Colombia, which potentially could open huge foreign trade as a result of at least the leniency or the liberalization from a foreign trade standpoint in that country. And it'll be interesting to see what the reaction might be from the U.S. if that bears fruit, and if in fact there is a significant demand in some of these other countries, such as Germany and others. It'll be interesting to see how that plays out politically. But you're right. I think the chances of interstate commerce, being altered before we're talking about import-export are certainly greater at the end of the day.
Yeah, once the interstate commerce barriers go down and the accountants get a look at this and start to see how much money is being made in tax, you're going to start to see people, for example, look in the US looking northward at Canada, which may be, if they're not doing it already, one of the first companies to import from warmer climate countries that can grow a lot more cannabis than you can in Canada. Because Canada, from what I've been told, and I have business colleagues and relatives up there, is a voracious market. They can't keep up with the supply. So this is going to redound to the benefit of South American, Central American countries who can grow it. And because of the tax revenue, that structure is already in place in Canada, if the US looks north and says, whoa, they're making a lot of money on this. Maybe in the next administration or the one after that, you might see some changes. Follow the money, as they say.
And we are a little past 2:30. I want to be cognizant of everybody's time. And I want to say thank you to everyone, especially Ken and Veronique and Ángela and Felipe. I know Melissa joined. Melissa, we will hopefully get to interviewing your firm on the next version of this call. But thank you again, Eric, as kind of the moderator of this call. Is there any last comments you want to make before we sign off?
Nothing in particular other than, again, as I emphasized at the start, the cat's out of the bag on this market, industry, whatever you want to call it. The revenues are significant, even though the regulatory and application and licensing hurdles are substantial. That is not keeping this market from growing substantially. The expectation is that it will actually be, in the US, it will be beyond the craft beer market in the range of about $70 billion by 2028, and that by 2030, it should be roughly about $100 billion in annual revenues. Places like New York opening up and New Jersey are obviously assisting in that revenue drive. But we will obviously continue to follow it within the group, and we'll continue to have, further and future opportunities along these meeting lines to discuss this, as well as a whole bunch of other aspects of the cannabis practice that continues to grow.
All right. Thanks again, everybody. Have a great remainder of your day.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you, everyone.